Welcome to the Future State, the podcast where technology, law, leadership, and society converge. My name is Emmanuel, and today we are exploring a question that many organizations are beginning to face. They are facing this because artificial intelligence has moved from experimentation into real deployments. The question we are facing today is who should lead AI governance? Is it the lawyers or the engineers? Is it compliance or the business? Or maybe the real answer that AI governance requires is that we need to introduce a new kind of leadership, one that crosses across law, technology, risk, ethics, and business accountability. And to answer all these questions today, I have a guest. My guest today is Dr. Niels Questa. Dr. Niels Questa, LLM, is a data scientist, technology law specialist, and a founder of GovernPASS AI. He held a PhD from the University of Stirling and an LLM with distinction in law, technology, and innovation from the University of Strathclyde. Niels, welcome to the Future State.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I would like us to start with the big question. When an organization deploys AI system, who should actually be responsible for making sure that the system is lawful, safe, fair, explainable, and of course, fit for purpose?
I think the difficulty is that several people are responsible for different parts, but organizations often fail to connect these responsibilities. The engineers may be responsible for technical performance. The lawyers might be responsible for legal interpretations. The data protection team may examine the use of personal data. Procurement may manage the suppliers. The business owner decides where the system is being bought and what is expected. The problem arises when everybody examines their own piece, but nobody determines whether the complete system is suitable for deployment. And an AI system can perform accurately and still be unlawful. It can be legally permissible in principle, but technically unreliable in practice. It can satisfy an overall performance benchmark while producing significantly worse outcomes for a particular group. It can claim to have human oversight when the human reviewer has actually no meaningful ability to challenge the results. So my answer is that AI governance requires a team, but it also requires someone who could connect the work of that team. So my essential proposition is that AI governance needs a full stack lead, but never a full stack sign off. One person may integrate the evidence and coordinate the governance process. That person should not validate every part of the system alone.
Yeah, I understand that there should be layers of sign-off. But why is this question becoming urgent now?
AI is now moving from experimentation into ordinary organizational decision-making. It's being used in recruitment, healthcare, finance, education, public administration, fraud detection, and customer services. So these systems may be effective whether somebody needs a job, a benefit, a loan, a medical attention, or access to public services. These are severe personal effects on people. So at the same time, organizations face that commercial and political pressure to adopt AI quickly. The pressure is to deploy this more often concentrated at senior levels, and responsible for identifying the risk is scattered across departments. So it creates a dangerous imbalance. So the organizations may move quickly towards deployment, but every individual specialist assumes that someone else is considering the wider consequences.
If an organization needs someone to do something, they can just assign someone. Why are they struggling to assign responsibility pertaining to AI governance?
I think they frequently confuse governance with documentation. An AI organization may have an AI policy, an ethics statement, a risk framework, and a committee. Those things may all be useful, but they do not prove that a particular AI system has been governed properly. The governance is about authority and decision. It asks who owns the use case, who approves it, who may challenge it, who may stop it, what evidence must be produced, who accepts the residual risk, what happens when a system changes. A policy may say that AI must be fair and transparent. That is a principle. An operational governance process must ask fair to whom, measured in what way, using what data, against which legal or business standard, who review the evidence, what happens when different fairness measures conflict. So a governance framework gives the organization questions to ask. Governance determines whether those questions are answered properly and whether the answers affect the deployment decision.
Okay. So, but do you think organizations underestimate how complex AI governance actually is?
You mean what the difference between having a framework and actually governing a system?
This is a follow-up from your previous submission. You mentioned that they are seeing it as a form of documentation, and that is compliance. Is it because they underestimate the nature of AI?
I think we have a framework which describes what good governance should contain. Actual governance produces evidence that those activities actually happened. So, for example, a framework may require human oversight. Real governance asks whether the reviewer has enough information, training, time, and authority to disagree with the system, because otherwise it will just be performative and some person signs it off at the end. But if that person actually understands anything, is the next question. And if then challenged by law in front of a court, you might really have a problem. So government has whether he has enough information. It also asks whether the overrides are recorded, whether management investigated case in which staff consistently reject the AI recommendation. And that is the difference between a statement and a function and control. We'll put it this way, the governance is not what an organization says in document. Governance is what can prove when challenged.
Governance is what one can prove when challenged. So based on that, many organizations still treat AI governance as a compliance exercise, but AI is now affecting people. It's affecting decisions and processes within the organization. This issue is becoming bigger and needs to be addressed. That will take us to our next topic. I would like to look at why AI governance is often misunderstood. And because it is clear that AI governance is more than a policy or framework. So the question that I'll put to you is that what do organizations often misunderstand about AI governance?
I'd like to repeat that a framework describes, you have a framework and then describe what governance should contain, but you actually have to make this happen in your real organization. So you can have some governance or reliance compliance software, but it doesn't actually prove anything really happened at all. So you have to actually prove the evidence that these activities happen. This can happen through, obviously somebody can sit there with a notebook and then try to film it, or you can have a kind of cryptographical background. So, for example, a framework may require the human oversight, but you have to show that in case of a situation of a lawsuit, that you had enough information, that there was training, there was time and authority to agree with the system, that there was not just somebody, junior was assigned to the role which had to sign off things in principle.
Many organizations start talking about governance after deployment. And with what you've said, this might be dangerous. Is that correct?
Yes, governance has to start before deployment, because governance that begins after the organization has bought and integrated a system has very little influence over the original decision. So once money has been spent and staff has been trained and processes have been reorganized around the supplier, stopping the system becomes commercially and politically difficult. So that can turn governance into a retrospective justification. Good governance begins while the organization still has meaningful choices. So governance that happens too late just becomes documentation and not control.
Governance must connect purpose, data model, legal duties, and everything together. And as I said, organizations need evidence of what was examined, who made the decision. It's not just enough that they think they've done it. They must be able to prove that they've actually done it. So I think the word that I'm going to be taking in this round is that governance is not what you say is in a document. Governance is what you can prove when challenged. So thank you very much, Niels, for all those inputs. Another one that I would like us to talk about is that lawyers are very good at law, but many of them, they might not be experts in data. I would like us to explore the legal perspective of this. What do you think lawyers bring to AI governance? And especially where are the limits of a purely legal approach?
Yeah, obviously lawyers are indispensable because they kind of know the practical side of how that ends up in court. They obviously understand duties, liability, evidence, and the structure of legal accountability. So if you kind of think about how the use case, you may need to consider data protection, discrimination law, employment law, consumer protection, procurement, public law, intellectual property, contractual liability, sector regulation. And they also ask an important question: could the organization defend this decision before regulated court or an affected person? That is obviously essential to assurance. But a lawyer may understand that the system must be accurate, fair, secure, without being able to determine whether the technical evidence actually demonstrates the qualities. A technical report may contain accuracy rate, confidence intervals through subgroups, all kind of different technical things. And the accuracy of those numbers does not establish that the right questions were tested. Might not be able to determine whether the training data is actually representative because it never worked with, in data science, whether the system is being used outside its validated context, because these are all data scientists. If the selected metrics hide important errors, because you have to understand these things, background and understanding or never use the model. If it's these new training data or what is the error rate, that the model might suddenly be off, or whether the monitoring process can detect actually serious failures. So legal analysis must therefore be connected to technical evidence, and the lawyer should determine whether the legal analysis is sufficient, but the lawyer should not be expected to certify the entire AI system.
Where do legal teams need support from technical teams? Because, for example,
I think the kind of essential problem is it's like, okay, you might understand the legal side of it, but you don't, you have somebody telling you from a technical team that this is okay, or is this not okay, or, do you actually understand what is being given to you? Do you understand if the technical person actually understands what you're talking about? We were talking you very different principle for us. When I had my data science training, I obviously tried to kind of be very precise and direct, and you know that because you have a similar background, is that often very precise, or you have probability estimates. But if you go into the humanities, which law is, this becomes very much a human thing, and that is a process which is determined by experience and law. So you have very different domains trying to communicate to each other, and then the lawyer possibly has to sign off, and who's then responsible if the technical person didn't really understand the law and the law didn't really understand the technique. And that's what I'm trying to get at. So the lawyers are important, but if there's wrong communication, then there's wrong communication.
Okay. So what you're saying is that a legal team can say we need to avoid discrimination, but they need the technical side to examine whether the model actually performed differently across group, or whether the data is representative, and all those details in collaboration to follow up with what the legal team wants.
Yeah, it needs to be a translator there at that point. Somebody that understands both sides, because otherwise we're going to get into trouble sooner or later.
Yeah, and then when it comes to legal sign-off, there is the saying that legal sign-off without technical evidence is not assurance. It is confidence without visibility. Is this the reason why? Is this one of the reasons why you've come up with GovernPASS AI?
Yes, partly because, it's okay. As general problem is like obviously that we're getting really at that problem. Can you actually prove, you can have from a general GRC model being these bigger softwares, do you actually have a way to prove all this? And that's the difference. Can you actually show, in all your complicated documentation, you get the rules and regulations, but where's the proof in this? And GovernPASS AI is supposed to basically give you an oversight that you're actually doing what you're doing in a very conflicting regulatory landscape. So the goal, we're actually trying to create the evidence and not just following possibly weak procedures, which might or might not work. But if somebody actually asks, you will have to prove that something happens at a certain time, that there was somebody actually having an oversight. How do you prove that? And that's what we're trying to solve, is that, and in an efficient way. It's like if you have, change documentation, if you have a radiologist given an image who actually looked at this, did they actually look at it? So, and at the same time, was the data kept safe? So all of this, we're trying to kind of find in a system the actual evidence.
Okay. So with GovernPASS AI, there will be no need for workers or team members to say, just trust me on that. There will actually be something that proves that this has been done. So I now want to take the conversation back to engineers. Sometimes when we are discussing any tech, and even in AI, there is this mindset that people have that this is an engineering stuff and only engineers can be part of it. But it is clear that engineers might be bringing a lot, but there are things that engineers may need. So, and that brings me to what I would like you to address next. So what do engineers bring to AI governance, and what might they miss if the process is treated as purely technical?
I mean, engineers obviously understand how the actual system works, so they can examine the data pipeline, the model architecture, validation process, deployment environment, security controls, monitoring system, failure mode, so they can ask what data was actually used. Is the data actually useful? How is it labeled? How is the model actually optimized for deployment? How reliable is the actual output? How does the performance differ between groups? What happens when the incoming data changed? What can the results be produced? And what happens when the supplier updates the model? So without that expertise, governance risk becomes detached from actual technology.
And some teams like to build a strong model. So I would like you to clarify, can a technical model still create legal or ethical risk?
So you're asking what engineers might miss if the process is treated purely technical?
Yeah, because the reason why I'm asking this is that there is a scenario where the model is strong, or the model is strong. I think this happened some time ago in HR. They build a very strong, it happens in HR, but let me use the one that is used by the police database more recently in the United Kingdom. So they build a model based on biased data sets. So even though the model is strong based on the wrong kind of data sets.
Yeah, sorry.
So that is why I want to clarify for us, can a technical strong model still create legal or ethical risk?
Yeah, I mean, taking a strong model can still be appropriate for the decision we just used, because engineers are normally given an objective to optimize. It may be accuracy, efficiency, fraud detection, cost reduction. The governance question is obviously if that objective represents the right legal, social, and organizational purpose. So an engineer can calculate false positives and false negatives, but deciding which type of area is tolerable inside a law framework may involve legal rights, human consequences, and business responsibility. And the legal process is obviously something which is very, it's like kind of very human. So you need the experience of a lawyer in there. So a fraud system may reduce financial losses while repeatedly blocking legitimate customers from accessing their money. A recruitment system may predict the similarity between previous successful employees while producing historic patterns of exclusion. And a healthcare system may predict risk accurately, but still be appropriate for deciding who receives treatment. The engineering team should attest what the system does and how it's tested, and where its limitations lie, but should not be required to determine alone whether the use is lawful, proportionate, and traditional acceptable. So a technical successful AI system might still be a governance failure.
Okay, so that means a model can perform well technically and can still be inappropriate for the context in which it is deployed. So the question is not just only whether the system works. The question should also cover if it should be used for the final decision, and then how will people contest the decision of that model, and if it is even fair for those people. So, and one thing I'm going to take away from this area is that a technically successful AI system can still be a governance failure. Just the last one before we leave this segment, how can we help technical teams see beyond model performance? Because many of them just want to have a model that is 99%, so how can we help them see beyond that?
So how we turn an ethical principle into an operational control? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, how can we help teams see beyond our model performance? That even though the model performance is great, there is still other elements like they still need to check for bias, they still need to check for fairness, they still need to look at the data set it is trained on, and ethics part of it, so I would say. One thing that we want to establish here is to know if ethics is enough. So the main question here is, where does ethics fit into AI governance? And why is ethics alone not enough?
It's obviously necessary because legality is not a complete test. The system against it might be legal permissible and still be manipulative, undignified, or socially damaging. So ethical reasoning is obviously a basis of law and kind of basics of conduct in a democratic society. So ethical reasoning helps organizations to examine fairness and dignity, autonomy, power, transparency, human impact. I mean, the first paragraph of the German Constitution is that the human dignity cannot be harmed. So this encourages people, the organizations, to ask not only can we do this, but should we actually do this? So the difficulty is that ethical language is obviously easy to endorse, but almost every organization will see that supports fairness, transparency, accountability, and trust. But the hard question is what those words change. If an organization says that human dignity matters, does it restrict certain forms of surveillance? Does it require accessible routes of appeal? Does it limit the types of data that system may use? Does it require consultation? If this is obviously not a legal question, but an ethical question, it can become a PR disaster if you cannot prove that you actually are fair, transparent, accountable, and trustworthy. This can become a kind of a public relations nightmare. So having some form of integration of that into governance is obviously possibly very important. I think we begin by asking what conduct the principle requires. Take fairness. So if you take fairness principle, that might produce several controls. The organization must identify the affected groups. I mean, in the UK, these are defined through the Equality Act 2010, race, gender, sexuality, age, and all these things. So it must then justify the chosen performance and fairness metrics. It must examine whether errors are distributed unevenly. It must record known limitations. I mean, there's several kind of reports for Amnesty International and other groups where it has exposed, obviously, the famous case Bridges versus Constable of South Wales and other things where things have been racial profiled. So this is a thing. So you kind of have to identify the group and actually understand what equality actually means here, also in a legal context. So you kind of have to record the limitations. You must establish a route for challenge and correction, and you must monitor outcomes after deployment. So the control that needs an owner and evidence a review date, a consequence if the requirement is not met. That is how the ethics then becomes operational. So ethics without implementation means aspiration, and governance turns aspiration into accountability.
So now that we've explored the role of lawyers and engineers, we can see that both lawyers and engineers are quite important and they play important roles in governance. So we are going to be taking a step further to discuss the hybrid law and technology. We'll look at where they meet together. And one question I would like to ask you, if you don't mind, is that you have argued that AI governance needs a full stack lead, but never a full stack sign off. So what do you mean by that?
So the full stack governance lead has to understand enough of the entire system to connect the disciplines. The opposite people want to always employ specialists, and specialists that can become very good at what they do. But the full stack governance lead obviously needs enough technical knowledge to challenge claims about data models, metrics, and deployment and monitoring. And they need enough legal and governance knowledge to translate technical facts into duties, controls, evidence, and defensible decision. So you need a kind of, you need a person who understands both sides. And that is basically a translation layer. And obviously, if you understand the system as a whole and you have also some business experience, you would then basically be able to kind of direct the things to the right way. So that's what a really good operational lead in that sense means. You need to understand the business purpose obviously, because risk cannot be assessed without knowing what the organization is trying to achieve. So when the technical TC is the false negative rate is 8%, the governance lead must ask 8% for whom. Does it differ across group? What harm follows from a false negative? So, and if the lawyer says that's not legally possible, you have to kind of then translate to the technical team what you actually want to, what actually happens here. So the hybrid lead does not validate everything alone. The hybrid lead just simply coordinates understanding across the system. And that's a very important translation layer, because otherwise you got different people doing different things and not really understanding each other.
Yeah, and if there is someone listening to us and feels like if we have somebody that is hybrid of law and engineering, that person is a master of jack of all trade, master of none, what will you say to that person?
What skills they should possess, and they should have a depth in at least one relative discipline and incredible fluency across the others. They may begin as a technical literate lawyer, a data science or legal training, or a risk and assurance professional with substantial technical experience. I think the important skills include understanding the AI life cycle, interrogating evidence and assumption, translating between professional languages, recognizing legal and equality implications, possibly in different contexts, because obviously UK, USA, China, and EU have very different approaches to all these things.
Okay.
Audits and assurance, facilitating disagreements, escalating unresolved risks, and communicating kind of complex system evidence to decision makers. So they need an institutional authority, and an institutional authority you get by becoming a leader in a sense from things. So there should be maybe in the future kind of C-suite governance lead, a translator without access to senior decision makers may defend the right problems, but still be able to influence the deployment. So that's just what you have to do if you want to get it right.
Yeah. So yeah, I just want us to flesh out this more. So what department should this person sit? Should they sit in legal or technology or risk compliance or the business? Which area should they?
I think there's no universal departmental answer. The role might sit within risk, responsible AI, governance, technology, legal operations, central assurance. The more important issue, I think, is independence and access. So the lead should be close enough to taking operation teams to understand what is happening, but suddenly independent to challenge delivery pressure. They should also have a direct escalation to the AI governance board, executive risk committee, or everybody, another body capable of pausing deployment. So that role should not be kind of buried between some kind of product team whose success is measured only by delivering the system quickly. It's all about having actual authority to stop something to save the organization from a severe mistake, and you might not realize that mistake immediately. That might happen when suddenly, whatever, in 2 years or 1 year, you suddenly get sued because somebody has a problem with your system or gets upset about whatever, and you decided with your AI system. I mean, if you kind of see, frequently, you might have an electricity blackout and the AI system doesn't understand the Scottish accent, so what the hell is that's a kind of AI decision, and that problem you can actually then not actually do what you wanted to do, and that can have severe consequences if you cannot communicate that you have a power failure, and vital systems like your relative is depending on these things.
Yeah. So Niels, we have a lot of good lawyers, in fact, excellent lawyers. And we also have intelligent engineers. The challenge is that we don't have a lot of people that are hybrid, that knows a lot about law and also do the same with engineering. So that is the question I want to ask. If there is a leader of an organization listening now, so can you articulate what happens when an organization do not have this kind of person?
Yeah, obviously, as we kind of described before, obviously the legal person might not totally understand the system and kind of trust an engineer who's kind of tasked with making this efficient and functional. They might sign something up which is not legal, even if they think it's legal, and the technical person might simply ignore, the legal aspects of this or the ethical aspects of this.
Okay. So this is probably one of the biggest gaps in the market then, because many organizations have AI framework, they have many legal teams. Of course, they have their technical teams, but fewer people can translate between these two worlds before the system goes live. So, what we've established so far is that AI governance need a full stack lead, but never a full stack sign-off. So since we recognize this problem, I think that will take us to our next segment where we are going to be discussing integration and validation, because it shows that this validation must remain separate. So you've mentioned this some time ago, but I now want to talk more about this. Why is it important to separate the person who integrates the governance process from the people who validate the system?
The person who assembles the assurance case should not become the sole judge of whether that case is adequate. The hybrid lead coordinates the evidence and identifies missing information, then has to convene specialists, ensure that the decision process is complete, but validation should just remain distributed among different competence function. Legal counsel obviously then validates the legal analysis, engineers and technical assurance specialists validate system performance and limitations. The data protection specialists examine the process of personal data. Cybersecurity specialists examine the security controls. So a quality recall rights specialist challenge impacts on affected groups. And the business owner has to accept the responsibility for purpose and the residual risk, which obviously always going to remain. So an independent audit may later examine then what the governance process worked properly. And this avoids conflicts of interest and prevents one person from making their own homework. The integrator just connects the evidence, the validators challenge it.
I would like if you wrap this for us by talking more about how to avoid that conflict of interest and also what a good challenge looks like.
A good challenge has probably 4 characteristics. First, the reviewer has the competence to understand the issue. The reviewer has to access the relevant evidence. The reviewer has sufficient independence from the delivery team. And the reviewer's objection has a real consequence. So a challenge function is meaningless if it may express concern but cannot delay condition escalate deployment. Good challenge does not mean that every specialist has permanent veto over every minor decision, but it should mean that mature unresolved concerns cannot simply disappear because the business wants to proceed, and that's where the problems lie. And I think there's why many of the bigger monopolies in the USA kind of end up in front of European courts.
So based on that, we are going to be moving to the next segment. And this time, I want us to focus on the role of the business. Business owners cannot outsource accountability. It is their responsibility. The question I would like to ask you is, why must business own AI outcome rather than pushing responsibility to legal compliance or the technical?
The business decides why the system exists. So legal did not decide that recruitment should be automated. Compliance did not decide to replace a customer service process. Engineering did not necessarily decide to purchase a particular supplier's platform. The business defines the problem, chooses the expected benefits, allocates the budget, and authorizes deployment. So it must therefore remain accountable for the consequences. Legal and technical teams advise and assure they do not own the commercial or public service purpose.
Why is it dangerous when business leaders see AI as someone else's business, AI governance?
Yeah, because at some point you might get sued, and that is very expensive. Recognizing that no serious system is completely risk-free. So, after the established available safeguards have been applied, and this might remain, the business owner must understand what remains, why it cannot be eliminated, and who may be affected and what monitoring contingency measures are in place. So residual risk assessment should be recorded rather than implied. So the business can essentially not outsource accountability for the outcomes of AI.
Okay. So if AI creates poor outcome and reputational damage, the organization cannot simply say compliance, approve it, or maybe the vendor say it has worked. So the business are the one that are choose to deploy the system. And because of that, they cannot outsource accountability for the outcome of the AI. So that is how I'm going to sum that up. So thank you very much, Niels. Thank you for joining the podcast. We are going to be moving to the next segment. And what I would like us to discuss next is from governance to assurance evidence, because we want to move from theory now into proof. Many organizations say that they have AI governance, but when you ask them for evidence, all they can show you is scattered documents, unclear ownership, and no single assurance picture. Why is that a problem?
Because the organizations may have these, as you said, these collection of documents without having a defensible decision. So the legal team may hold a data protection impact assessment, technical team may have a validation report, procurement may have a supplier questionnaire, security may have a penetration test, the business may have a benefit case, the governance committee may have meeting minutes, but these documents may not describe the same system version, use case, deployment change. The legal assessor might assume that the meaningful human oversight exists. The operating team may, in practice, follow the AI recommendation automatically. The supplier may claim that the model is fair. The technical report may contain only an overall accuracy score. Each document may appear acceptable in isolation and connected. They may expose to serious gaps. So assurance requires the organization to create a coherent case showing what the system does, what evidence supports the claims that made about it, to review each part, what remains unresolved, what conditions were imposed, who approved deployment, and how the system will be monitored. So if you cannot show the evidence, you do not have assurance. You have a belief system, and if your AI system has severe consequences for a human being, this can become quite a big case for yourself with a high financial risk. So you better try to do this.
If a business cannot show evidence, they do not have assurance. The only thing they have is a belief. So that is where I'm saying that what are the kind of evidence that business makers should be able to see clearly?
Strong sources.
I would like to bring that as a practical example, because with GovernPASS AI, you've been working on this for a while and you've played a big role as the founder. So you are the founder of GovernPASS AI. What gap did you see in the market that made you build it?
Just saw that organization conduct governance activities without being able to actually assemble a coherent assurance case for a particular AI system, not just like kind of general, we kind of do this. So they may have policies, spreadsheets, legal analysis, technical reports, and a wee nice governance, risk, and compliance platform. You have, as I said, technical reports, procurement documents, supplier claims, but they struggle to really answer the basic question. What is the actual evidence for trusting and restricting or stopping this particular AI system? So the traditional governance and risk and compliance platforms, usually called GRC platforms, are primarily organization-centered. They manage enterprise policy, risk register, control responsibilities, audits, and compliance processes. But GovernPASS AI is system-centered. A concise distinction is where I would say that a traditional GRC shows that the organization has a process for managing AI risk. GovernPASS shows whether a particular AI system has enough evidence to pass through that process. So GovernPASS is intended to bring the legal, the technical, the procurement, the oversight evidence together. So it gives you a kind of oversight what if you actually can prove this, if you're going to be legally challenged. So it all shows that evidence exists, which requirement it supports, and what is missing, and to review it, and whether the system is ready for a decision.
Well, thank you very much. So what problem does GovernPASS AI solve that spreadsheet and policy documents do not solve well?
Yeah, basically kind of brings together all this evidence and gives you an oversight what is actually done, and if everything has been done, it gives you a kind of assurance passport. This is not a kind of, it kind of gives you a way to see, you're gonna have somebody has some form. But yeah, again, just like kind of, actually trying to prove what you're actually doing.
So
for a legal challenge, you will have to prove that you did this. It's like, it's not like, okay, did the lawyer signed it off? It's like with a, it's like, I mean, if you drive a car from wherever, and you see, that, yeah, okay, I was not drunk. You will have to prove that you're not drunk. If it's like in any kind of high stakes situation, you will have to prove that you actually did what you did.
Okay. So who is the assurance passport for? Is it the lawyers, technical teams, procurement teams, board, regulator, or business owner? Who is the target of it?
What the assurance passport does a structured portable representation of the governance evidence for a particular AI system. So it doesn't simply say that the system is responsible or compliant. It shows the basis for that conclusion. So it can conclude that the system's purpose and owner, the intended and permitted users, the data model and documentation, the technical validation, the legal and the equality analysis, supply evidence, human oversight arrangements, security controls, no limitations, monitoring requirements, outstanding issues, and the court of review and approval. So the passport makes the insurance position understandable to different audiences. So a buyer then might need to know whether sufficient due diligence has been completed.
So thank you very much, Niels, for talking about GovernPASS. What I would say is that GovernPASS exposes a particular problem that already exists because it shows that governance evidence are not organized and we don't have access to the assurance information. So yeah, so and that is what GovernPASS AI is doing, because AI governance needs to move from scattered documents to decision-ready evidence. So, but although you've talked about GovernPASS as a tool, I would like us to move beyond theory. I want us to go into the practical scenarios. One area I would like to talk about is AI recruitment. There's always a lot of discussions around AI recruitment, because if AI is making a decision on if somebody have a job or not, and sometimes I'm hearing that a lot of organizations now use AI to screen the CV. And in most instances, when they do this, they don't even give a feedback to the applicants. So when the applicant applies, AI was used, and there is no legal way for those applicants to challenge the decision of the AI or the explanation. So let's take AI recruitment. A supplier claim accuracy, but cannot explain subgroup error rates or training data provenance. So what should governance process ask for deployment in that particular scenario?
I think the system should not just proceed merely because the supplier provides an impressive headline metric, but the organization should obviously establish where the accuracy measure means what population was tested, whether the local applicant population is comparable, and how errors are distributed. Obviously, you have different population consistencies in different regions, even in the UK, which you can see obviously from government data. So it should examine if the intended purpose, whether the model uses proxies, they may reproduce historical distribution, which would be obviously under law would be kind of indirect discrimination. So you have to have legal, technical, HR, and equality expertise involved. So the organization should therefore establish what applicants are told to human review operators and how incorrect and unfair process can be challenged. What happens if a subject ask request comes through and where the material evidence is unavailable? That is not simply an administrative gap. It simply might be a reason that not to deploy this.
Okay. So what evidence would you want before this type of system is approved? Because this is an issue for most organizations. Everybody wants to be able to recruit faster, quickly. So what kind of evidence?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you basically have to match the people you employ to the actual population pyramid. So if there are, simplest example being 50-50 men and women, if you have employed 80% of men, then you're wrong. If you have employed 80% of women, then you're theoretically wrong as well. I mean, you can possibly talk yourself out of this because of individual
circumstance.
No, the individual, basically how the law works. It doesn't look at the complete evidence. It will look at the individual case, but you will kind of have reputational damage in this case. And you basically, at some point, you will have to prove, the way the employment law works is that, once the complainer, so basically the person which was employed, establishes that there might be a legal basis that they can't complain, then you as the AI deployer will have to basically say that why you did this. You have to basically state your case. And if you can say like, okay, you can, if a woman complains she was suitable for the position, she could show that you were suitable for that position, but you have employed 80% men, you have no
Women?
recourse because you cannot really show why that person was employed. You have also thing going on like unconscious bias that you kind of in hindsight try to rationalize a decision which seemed logical to you, but which isn't logical. And you have something like in every population record, you have population pyramids. And this can then go over age, where it's a bit more complicated, or race or sexuality, where you have to be able to somehow show that your system is actually fair. And if it isn't, then you are somewhat in trouble.
Okay. So does Equality Act 2010, is it relevant here? How does Equality Act 2010 become more relevant here?
The Equality Act becomes relevant.
Yeah. Is it relevant?
Yeah.
Now you are talking about...
Yeah, but as I tried to say, is like there are measures in data science how you can prove if an organization actually portrays a picture of the equality that they claim to do. If the website has only young people, or only male people, or only female people, or kind of white people, whatever. It's like, it's not that these things are not measurable by different things. You can use the data science against the university. You can produce a model which produces, it's like if your whole team on your web page shows that you only employ white people, then, and then the population has a considerable amount of black people in it, you will have a problem. If you show everything is nice and young, and there's a population, where nearly half the population is older and has considerable more skills, you have a harder defense on yourself if you're going to court, which eventually will go, because the applicant has to show firstly that they think they have, and then they have to basically, it's a problem if you cannot show that your system actually is equality conscious.
So thank you very much for that. With that, we'll move to our second scenario, public sector AI procurement. In public sector AI procurement, I would like to know what happens when a public body buys a platform based mainly on a vendor's claim.
Well, it transfers the informational power to the supplier without transferring accountability. So the public authority remains responsible for the decision, and it may not possess the evidence required to understand or challenge that system. Obviously, that's a problem of globalization. And as we know through the public sector quality duties, the demands on the public sector are quite higher than on private things, where you also then have things like freedom of information requests. And the procurement should therefore require more than a product demonstration. The contract should address access to assurance evidence, audit right, incident notification, material model changes, data use and retention, the performance modeling, subcontractors, exit arrangements, and responsibility when the system causes harm. So the local context also matters here, because obviously a system deployed in Scotland is not the same as, even if the Equality Act is in Scotland and UK wide, you might kind of a Scots law interference in certain things. So a model validated in one organization population might not perform appropriately in another. I mean, you have the population differences, for example, if you would take London, which is highly diverse, compared to maybe somewhere in the Highlands, where has largely an English immigrant population, So procurement is therefore one of the earliest and most important AI governance controls.
So what I'm saying is that I want to play a devil advocate here. Some public sector organizations have all these big companies, big suppliers that does almost everything to them for them. And because of that, sometimes it's possible that, let's assume they say we have only buy the platform based mainly on vendor claim, because this vendor has supplied us with so many materials and we have confidence in them. So if there are public sector organization that is saying that, what will be your message for them?
Yeah, you have to really kind of test the supplier's claims in your local legal territory. You cannot, if you mean, obviously the biggest frontier models are from the USA and from China. So if you're in a EU context, you will obviously have to have harder controls if you're in the UK, and they are probably more permissive than the European Union. You still have to kind of check the local context and where you operate that system. So just don't take the vendor's claims for granted.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Niels. There is another issue that I want us to discuss. A lot of the time when organizations deploy AI system, they put it as part of the architecture, human in the loop, and also some people call it human oversight. But in most cases, this human that's in the loop are humans that might not really be able to make any changes if something goes wrong. So, and in that case, human oversight may be is rather symbolic instead of it being meaningful.
And that's opposite ceremonial kind of performance oversight.
Yeah.
So human oversight requires that the person understands the role of the AI, knows its limitation, can access relevant information, has the authority to alter or reject the outcome. And sometimes I question the experience level of some people, which are, like I saw actually the NHS so in social care, that people might be too junior to actually understand the system and I don't mean age, I mean just from experience level, that they or kind of don't understand the whole system. If you understand human rights, you don't understand the equality. Like if you're a human rights lawyer, that applies then possibly, this is not a European issue, this is a European.
I think
So if the RIA must have enough time to exercise independent judgment, if the performance target effectively force staff to accept every recommendation, the human is not providing oversight, the human is legitimizing automation. So the organization should monitor override rates and investigate whether the staff feels able to challenge the system. I mean, as you know, there's been several issues with even home office automation, which has been then challenged by several charities, which basically, as you know, and obviously a caseworker then basically says like, okay, I see something on the screen, I force from management to kind of sign this off. Then this is not human oversight, it's frankly a joke.
Yeah, so I think what I will get from what you're saying is that it is not a human oversight if the reviewer is not given the time to react or authority to make changes, or if the reviewer has limited information or cannot make enough changes or make decision. So yeah, so all those should be there so that human oversight is meaningful rather than it being symbolic. So now we want to talk about model changes after approval. So I'm going to be asking you, should AI approval be treated as a one-time event or an ongoing process? And the reason for this is that I'm eager to know what happens when a model, threshold, or data set or supplier process changes after a system has already been approved.
Yeah, the assurance cases then might not longer be valid. Approval should be attached to a defined system version. It's like kind of software version intended use in deployment context. So a material change may alter performance, legal effects, affected groups, monitoring requirements. Organizations therefore need some finite change control threshold. So minor technical maintenance may require routine review, a new model of structural retraining, altered decision thresholds, new data sources, or expanded use case may require formal reassessment. So AI approval is not a one-time event. It's a life cycle process, like any kind of software life cycle process.
So our next scenario, which is going to be the final scenario, is going to deal with how organization can prevent fragmented accountability. And what I would like you to discuss is what happens when legal, technical, and business team each sign up their own parts, but no one validates the combined system.
Yeah, this is obviously where AI governance feel occurs. Every individual function may have performed its assigned business case or whatever the C-suite wanted, and overall decision remains unsupported. The legal analysis may rely on assumption that the technical team never tested the technical validation, may use a purpose different from the one pursued by the business, and the business may believe that the approval by each department means no residual risk remains. So the hybrid lead must connect, like we talked before, that the person understands business, technical, and legal things. they must connect those accounts and expose contradiction before deployment. So the risk in AI governance often lives within the gaps between the departments.
So all the scenarios that we've discussed showed why AI governance is not a paper exercise. Majority of these risks often appears in the gaps between teams. Those are areas that team A might assume team B is doing, but no one is actually taking that responsibility. So, and that is where those risks often is. So now that we've talked about the scenarios, I'm happy for us to move to the next segment. And here we would like to talk about what good AI governance looks like in practice. And I think I would just put it out as an open question. If there is a leader of an organization or anybody that is interested in doing the right thing by listening to this podcast, and they wanted to govern AI properly before deployment, what should the process look like for them?
I think it should first begin obviously with a business purpose, because you're running a business. So what problem do you want to solve, and who will be affected, and is AI actually necessary? So what alternatives are considered? The organization should then appoint a named business owner and classifies the use according to its potential impact. It should map the system, data, suppliers, users, and deployment environment. Actually cannot take account which data they have, which obviously many people do. The relevant legal, equality, privacy, ethical, cybersecurity, and operational risks should be identified. Evidence should then be gathered from internal teams and suppliers. So technical claims should be tested rather than accepted at face value. The human oversight should be designed as an actual control. Decision rights should be clear. The organization should know who can approve, who can impose conditions, who can stop deployment, and obviously have a look in on if the is actually working, so the person who can stop deployment can do so without severe consequences for themselves. So there's no fear factor in here. So then the residual risk should then be documented and accepted by the appropriate business owner, executive owner. And finally, there must be monitoring after deployment. So the organization has to track technical performance, complaints, overrides, incidents, group impacts, and material changes. So governance ends only when the system is retired and its data and obligations have been dealt with appropriately.
Once an organization has followed this process and their AI tool has been deployed, how often should this system be reassessed?
How often?
Yeah, how often should it be reassessed?
That depends on the organization. We can't simply say it depends on the AI system. That's why we want to kind of put GovernPASS AI, because you have to kind of look at each individual AI system in our organization. It cannot be, you can't give a simple answer.
Is it for this particular instance, is this why it is important for organizations to have something we call ML observability, so that they can monitor the performance of their AI system regularly?
So, yes, I mean, obviously you have to kind of monitor your AI system continuously,
because there will be data changes which might cause data drift.
Yeah. Different versions. If it's, very dangerous, obviously is often that you have, as a provider, a startup has funders. The funders suddenly might decide that the current business owner is not suitable anymore. They install a new CEO. CEO has different validations. The thing suddenly might be stock market. So, my personal thing is like I had to, technical supplier of measurement devices. They was very good, but they were suddenly stock floated. The documentation didn't exist, and suddenly deployer or your provider suddenly disappears from the market. Then you have also a problem. So especially with kind of new businesses with AI systems often are with startups, you're running a risk. What can you trust the continue of that process? So everything is a kind of moving picture.
Thank you very much. So what I would get out from that is that AI governance should happen early enough to influence decision, not late enough to simply document the decisions already made. And also governance controls can happen based on organizations. So, and the system can be reassessed maybe when there are data changes or other events in the course of the activity. So thank you. And that brings us to the real elephant in the room, because a lot of organizations genuinely want to do something good, but then what about if there is nobody to actually do it? And that brings us to the real skills shortage. AI has come and it has changed the future of work. So, so in this particular case, I would like to know, are organizations lacking like governance framework, or are they lacking people who can translate between those disciplines?
The opposite, already many frameworks, standards, regulatory principle, impact assessments, audits, methods, risk management, models. The most serious shortage is people who can understand those frameworks intelligently across organizational boundaries. So you have lawyers, as we said, engineers, business leaders. They may use the same words, but they mean different things. So accuracy has a technical meaning, but it may also have a legal and operational meaning. So transparency may mean model interpretability to an engineer, privacy notice to a lawyer, or an understandable and explanation to an affected person. So risk can mean statistical uncertainty, legal exposure, financial loss, or harm to an individual. The governance lead must help create a shared language. The strongest practitioners are likely to be T-shaped, retain depth in one discipline, such as law, engineering, privacy, audit, but develop enough breadth to communicate credibility across the others. So the real governance gap is just not the frameworks, it's the translation.
So that means that in this particular case, interdisciplinary education matters, and the future of AI governance may depend less on writing more framework and more on developing people who can use them intelligently. So, and the follow-up question I would have is, how should organization develop this capability? Because sometimes you recruited someone as a lawyer or you recruited another person as an engineer. Will you suggest organizations to help their workers become more diverse in that and embrace that way of working?
Obviously, you should treat interdisciplinary governance as a professional capability rather than an additional task given formally to someone in legal or compliance. So the lawyers should obviously learn how AI systems are developed, evaluate, and monitor. The engineer should learn about legal accountability, discrimination, data protection, meaningful redress. And business leaders should learn how to interpret assurance evidence and accept residual risk. I mean, as we said before, data science or engineering are kind of more precise evidence kind of frameworks, while legal also deals with evidence, but it is a dense kind. It is concentrated as a humanity. You know, humanity means that it's largely established in words and personal feelings. You might have a judge, which is one thing as a one thing and the other one as another thing. So humanities are more of a soft framework. So you have to kind of translate from the humanities to science. And that is a very different skill set to have somebody able to understand both to certain things. So organizations should obviously create career paths into AI governance leadership.
So should universities train more hybrid law and technology professionals, like Strathclyde now have LLM in law, technology, innovation? Should more universities do that?
On the demand, yes. Principally, yes. But I think the first step should be some form of realizations like we are doing here, that these people are actually needed. Actually, several universities do this already, but the training is mostly kind of charity based and it's often not really kind of business related. So I think there should be, yes, they should be trained, but the business side of it kind of comes a wee bit short. So yes, they should do this, but they should make sure that the course also has a business orientation and not just a kind of legal and ethic based. Because if you train somebody in a law department, they will again have the same problem. So I think the ideal solution is that universities come up with actual hybrid courses where not data science train a wee bit ethics and lawyers train a wee bit technology. So creating that course will be a challenge for the future, while obviously people like us have done this, we obviously have to provide our own initiatives to kind of really be interconnected. So there might be a thing for this, but I think there needs to be still some work done to understand also on the government side what people like this actually have to do and be able to form in the future. As in the specialist world, it is very difficult to get the concept of universality over, that some people have to be there which are not specialists but are kind of generalists.
So what should lawyers learn about technology, and what should engineers learn about law and government?
I think a lawyer should I think it possibly might be harder for a lawyer if they're not trained in technology, because that's obviously a very hard process. And obviously a lawyer will seem possibly different, but you have to kind of really be actual operational in some form of data science or data engineering process to actually understand the practical side. Obviously for a technologist, it's hard to kind of get purely into the law side because having that experience actually in front of court would be very difficult. So there needs to be a kind of general concept, what to train whom and what is the transitional lead here. So it is really a kind of concept issue where you have to basically really think about what you're doing and what is valuable for your organization and specialty, and therefore you need some form of advice.
All right. So thank you very much, Niels. What I would sum that up is that the real AI governance gap is not the framework, it's its translation between different professionals. I would like you to tell a leader that is listening and the organization, if they want to adopt and scale AI, what they should do next.
They should, I think, start first understand if they actually need development. It really depends on your organization. I mean, if you have a small organization and you're really agile, yeah, it might be possible for you just to experiment with this. But if you're a big organization, you really need to kind of understand, can your organization actually cope with the speed of the change of software development? Do you have really actually the people in place to make then the AI governance work? So you need to have a point of named business owner. You need to build a cross-functional governance team before the procurement and not after deployment. Demand evidence from the supplier. You have to separate integration from validation, make sure human oversight is actually meaningful, record the residual risk and who accepts it, establish monitoring and change control. Most importantly, create conditions in which specialists can raise concerns without being treated as obstacles. Then responsible governance is not really the enemy of innovation. It makes innovation sufficiently trustworthy to survive scrutiny, scale, and adoption by people, so people actually want to use it and are not kind of hindered by it.
So thank you very much. So as a follow-up to that, what is one mistake leaders should avoid? Many organizations are always talking about the fact that they want to start making use of AI, they want to document this and that. But in reality, many of them don't follow through. So what is one sign that an organization is not ready for AI deployment?
Companies, the feeling was that everybody tried to assign their responsibility to somebody else. So it really depends on your organizational culture here.
See?
I think it's just have somebody in your organization that has a reasonable understanding of most of the systems that they can translate between people. And that person should be managing the governance side of it. I should obviously run the business, but it obviously has to decide if your AI governance actually works or is just performative and might run into trouble later in court.
Thank you very much. One thing that we've established today is that one person can lead AI governance, but no single person can validate the entire system alone. Niels, thank you for joining me on the Future States. This has been a really important conversation because AI governance is discussed in broad terms, but today we have brought it down to something very practical. We've talked about who leads, who challenges, who signs off, and who owns the risk. And of course, we talk about what evidence that prove governance actually happen. So for everyone listening, this episode is a reminder that AI governance is not just a legal issue, it is not just technical as well and not just ethical. It is an interdisciplinary leadership challenge. So if you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe to the Future States on YouTube and follow the podcast on Spotify, and share this episode with a colleague, leader, lawyer, engineer, policymaker, a business owner, or anyone that is thinking about AI governance. Until next time, please keep asking not only what technology can do, but what future it is helping us create. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.